What is going on, y'all? I'm KM Best. The newest OTAs for Marvel Snap just dropped, and Loki got hit, but not in the way I expected. This is what Second Dinner has introduced in order to tone down the power of Loki decks. A big hit to the Collector, who was probably the largest when played win rate outlier in the deck. Obviously a very, very powerful card previously, now a little bit worse, especially in the context of decks that don't play Loki. I would go so far as to say this card might actually be dead outside of Loki decks. It's an unfortunate casualty of Loki, but I understand why they would want to target the very obvious offender of this guy's getting to 20 power in mirrors. He's getting to 11 power in non-mirrors. I think the future of Loki archetypes are going to be pretty interesting with this change, because a lot of what I've been doing is shaving on card generation. I'm only running 3 right now. Granted, 2 of those, Snow Guard and Agent Coulson, both add multiple cards to my hand. I'm kind of wondering if I need to go back up to 4 card generator cards in order to make the Collector better in normal games of Marvel Snap when I'm not Lokiing. I'm not exactly sure what that will do to my ability to include cards like Angela, Kitty Pryde, and Jeff. There are some genuine considerations that have to be made for the Loki archetype, but I will say, over the course of about 250 games on High Infinite Ladder, my win rate with Loki before this change was about 67.7%, and that is, I think, kind of fundamentally unreasonable, so I'm not necessarily upset to see something change in this list. I'm a little sad that it's this, because it ends up causing splash damage to any other deck that may have wanted to run Collector, but I don't really, in my heart of hearts, think that those decks were ever really that real, honestly. So I guess I'm fine with it. This change might not look like it was aimed at Loki, but honestly, I kind of think it was, and I kind of think it's a little bit overdue. For the longest time, I have proposed that Shadow King should be a 2/3. Compare him to something like Scarlet Witch, and you can sort of see where I'm coming from with that. Now with cards like Luke Cage at 2/2, I don't necessarily think he has to be a 2/3 to be competitive. I think he'd be fine at 2/2, but 2/3 puts him at a very competitive stat line for a very powerful effect. One of the things that I know here is that there are 2 cards that he goes particularly well with now. The first is Sera. Sera is most impactful when she is hitting things that cost 2. That is a 50% reduction in cost. When she's hitting things that cost 3, that is only a 33% reduction in cost. Her biggest efficiency is with 2 cost cards, so there is that to be said. And in addition, she now pairs well with Wave. Shadow King, of course, not she, pairs well with Wave now as a turn 5 play. You can Shadow King and Wave on the same turn. That is quite powerful. So those additional synergies to Shadow King, I think, make this a very, very, very powerful card now. I already thought Shadow King was pretty good, but now I think he is maybe one of the best tech cards in the game. I think you're going to see a lot more Shadow King than you did previously, and I think that's going to be a roughly correct thing to do. Things that have been hit by Shadow King have been rising in prominence. So Craven, Angela, Kitty Pryde, the Collector, these cards are kind of everywhere, and now Shadow King is really answering them. He even takes the top off some of the Shuri decks. Of course, he will absolutely nuke a Taskmaster, but you can just drop him in the Shuri lane if you're really interested in taking the top off of that as well. So there's a lot that you can do with this card right now. I think he is one of the premier, if not the premier tech options in the entire game of Marvel Snap right now. And I would not be surprised if he ended up getting nerfed himself, again, down to a 2/2. I do think this is the appropriate energy cost for him. I think he's probably a little bit too strong at 3 power, but I'm happy to see how things shake out. One of the quickest turnarounds we've ever had from a nerf into another change here is happening right here with Spider-Ham going from a 2/2 to a 1/1. 2/2, it just sort of wasn't a real card. At 1/1, it might actually be a real card. And one thing that's interesting for me here with Spider-Ham at 1/1 is the bounce archetype, because Falcon, of course, allowing you to repeat it. In previous iterations of this card, Spider-Ham was always hitting the most expensive card, so bouncing him wasn't particularly relevant. But now that he's always hitting the leftmost card, there's a chance you can actually double up or even triple up on his effect with Beast and Falcon, and I'm a little bit interested in doing that. I understand that the leftmost card is often going to be a pretty expensive card, but sometimes it's not, especially if you're playing this guy early enough. You might actually be able to get multiple legitimate good pig targets with this guy in your hand. That said, the first time you play him, when you pig something, you make it a lot less likely for them to play that card anyway. It's not like most people are going to be playing out a pig here, but it is something that's worth keeping an eye on, especially in the context of his Shadow King interaction. Shadow King, of course, dropping the pig to 0 power a lot of the time because the pig is coded as a 0/0. So definitely something to keep in mind there. I don't know when they're going to fix that. I don't know if they're going to fix that. Maybe they have fixed that. Let me know in the comments below. But as I recall, the way it works is if you Shadow King a pig, the pig goes to 0. So maybe there's something to be done in that space with like a bounce deck with Shadow King. I'm interested in finding out because Shadow King especially is good when you don't have priority, and bounce is really good at getting rid of priority. Lady Sif receiving the first buff she's ever received, going from a 3/4 to a 3/5, keeping the same effect. For those who are unaware, back in the beta, Lady Sif was a 2/4. Very, very powerful for her cost. She was costed as if her effect was a downside. Of course, in basically no decks was she played in that she would be a downside. So she was just a very undercosted card for what she was giving you basically any of the time she would ever see play. Of course, in discard, a 2/4 Lady Sif was ridiculous. 3/5, a lot less ridiculous, but I do think it is pretty impactful that she's now just a good stat line. I think this could really result in some more Lady Sif Ghost Rider scenarios where like the Lady Sif just being a big body into, Ghost Rider, presumably into something completely messed up, is something that's definitely worth considering, especially since it's just finicky enough for Loki not to get a good version of it, right? So Lady Sif into Ghost Rider, if your opponent only gets 1/2 of the combo, you're probably fine with that. Or if they don't get like a good payoff to the combo, this is something that I think has been flying under the radar a little bit, and I'm hopeful that Lady Sif's buff will bring it out, because I do think that there are some probable Lady Sif Ghost Rider type things you can do that will beat most Loki decks because they're so confusing when the Loki player gets them, even if they are discounted a little bit. I think having something that finicky in your deck is usually it's a downside, but in Loki meta might be a little bit of an upside. So hopefully this also indirectly helps to keep Loki in check. Here's an interesting one. Black Cat going to 4/9. I think this is a really clever little thing for them to do because it's not like anyone is playing Black Cat outside of decks that are like Ghost Ridering her, right? So going to 4/9 is pretty cool. I think that's like a nice little way to make the way that people tend to build decks with Black Cat a little bit more rewarding, because she's only ever really being played in Ghost Rider decks or Hela decks. That's pretty much it. Her downside is too strong otherwise, like for her to just be absolutely unplayable a decent amount of the time. Losing her for nothing is just not the kind of thing you can do and expect to win games, so you need to be playing a way to bring her back. And that means that the bigger she is, the more that'll help you, because it's not like you're actually playing her to play her. You don't play this card so you can play a 3/7 or a 4/9, whatever her stats may be at the time. You play this card to do unfair stuff with it with Ghost Rider and Hela, and the bigger her stats are, the better that is for decks like that. So I think that this is a pretty solid change. I'm happy to see what comes with it. And once again, it's a little bit of a nerf to Loki, but not as much as potentially the Lady Sif one is, because, the Loki player gets this, they would love playing a 3/9. They are very able to do that as well. So I think, in terms of buffing strategies that otherwise are good into Loki, I think this is a pretty solid one, because Hela stuff tends to be pretty good into Loki, in my opinion. And that really sort of feels like the whole vibe of this patch, right? It's not just Collector getting nerfed that's going to impact Loki. It's Shadow King getting buffed. It's Lady Sif getting buffed. It's Black Cat getting buffed. I think 4 of the 5 changes being made here are changes that sort of shift the meta away from Loki. So, what do you think? Do you think this is going to be enough to make Loki no longer the absolute best deck in the game that I currently believe that it is? I'm a little interested to find out. I think the Collector nerf might be impactful, but the Shadow King buff might be a little more impactful, honestly. It's a very interesting situation. And of course, there's a bunch of people playing Galactus stuff now that Alioth has come out. So that actually puts additional pressure on those Shadow King decks, because a lot of those Shadow King decks want to be playing Shadow King last on turn 6. And of course, Alioth says, well, you can't do that. So if you're a deck that wants to leverage Shadow King, you end up falling behind. The Galactus Alioth decks can punish you. It looks like we're headed for a very interesting metagame. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I still read all of them. I will say I have stopped putting a heart on every single one of them. That ended up being like a really large portion of my day, weirdly, is to do that. And I wanted to remove the sort of rote just pressing of the heart button, but do know that I am still reading every single comment on my videos. Yes, even the ones that tell me I need to stop crying about Loki so much, all of those, they're appreciated too. This one goes out to you, buddy. Thank you so much. I really, really do appreciate everyone who watches my videos. Sincerely, even if you disagree with me, thank you for watching. Thank you for telling me your opinions. It means a lot to me that people are engaging with me in that way, and I really do appreciate it. As always, I've been KM Best. I will see you in the next one.